Welcome to the architect panel. So what we're going to talk about today is, as most businesses, you guys know, have a common objective. And what is that common objective, right? It's improve your user experience, delight your customers, and grow your bottom line. So identity and access obviously are core as part of protecting your assets, whether those are digital assets, intellectual assets, helping understand what users are accessing, what preferences they have, and everything. So IAM plays a critical role, and so this distinguished panel here is going to help us understand the highs and the lows that they have gone through, and any advice. So before I have them introduce themselves, what I'd like to do is to make sure that you guys get value, so I want to make it more interactive. So if you guys have questions, raise your hand, and if I don't respond to you, just yell at me, because I would like to keep it interactive and take your questions as we're going along, because I want to make it useful to you guys. So with that, why don't we start at the end and introduce you guys?
Yeah, my name is Kristina Williams. I'm a senior manager at Cisco. I manage our customer identity and access and our data protection and privacy programs, or IT.
Morning, everyone. My name is Greg Smith. I'm the Director of Identity and Access Management Engineering for Johnson & Johnson Technology. And my engineers build all of our single sign-on, multi-factor, PKI, access governance. The list goes on, I won't bore you. I have everything but Active Directory, and I have a peer who worries about that very effectively.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Kesler, and I'm an enterprise architect focusing on customer identity management, and I work for a telecommunications firm in Alaska, GCI.
Hello, I'm Kim Cameron. I'm the architect of identity at Microsoft.
Thank you. So you guys deal with industry regulations, rogue developers, rogue product managers. I know I was one, so in my past life, caused a lot of concern to my CISOs and my IT departments. Breaches, hacks, and then demanding business leaders. So what are some of the basic challenges that you guys have faced? Just some basic question around identity and access, and what's your advice on how you've handled them? Where you might have thought you were doing something, and in hindsight, you might do it differently also. So who wants to go first? Greg, I think.
I will go first.
Greg?
So we have a lot of challenges with people in the C-suite not speaking the same language that we do. One advantage my group has is that we've been part of information security and risk management for about the past 6 years, which really helped us with a leader who understands what we're talking about and is willing to fund it. And so that's really moved us forward in terms of what we're able to achieve to protect our business. And it's a complex business. You've heard of J&J being a family of companies. We're huge. We're over 200 operating companies in over 65 countries, and it makes for some really diverse challenges in how we meet all of their needs to keep them secure. And our focus is on authentication and authorization. And so just getting to a point where we had an advocate in our CISO with the senior leaders in the organization really turned things around for us. So that was huge. So
having that relationship and making sure that everybody's talking the same language is important then?
It's crucial. If the people who control the budget don't understand what you're doing and what you're talking about and why it's important to protect your business, they're not going to fund the projects and the products that you need to keep your business secure.
I would jump in and agree totally with that. My focus is customer identity management, which is a little different, and managing the identities for all of our end customers, like all of you guys, your cell phone, your cable TV, et cetera. And the C-suite is the real challenge for us, and getting the backing and the understanding of why customer identity is so important and why it's more than just your username and password. And really the big challenge for us is to create a frictionless identity, a customer identity experience. But we're in a difficult position. A telecom company is really one step below financial companies and healthcare companies in terms of the sensitivity of the information that we keep and protect. And so to have a frictionless identity experience, on the one hand, for ease of customer engagement, and on the other hand, we have to be very, very careful about who we let in and who we let view, for example, your internet usage records or your call records. And that's really, for us, I think the biggest challenge is that experience and juggling those two.
Yeah, for us, similar, because I do customer identity and access too. There's similar challenges there in terms of bringing that in. And as you know, Cisco acquires a lot of companies and rapidly gets fragmentation happening really quickly. And you have all sorts of use cases. And then also because we have all different constituents that care about identity across the company. Your marketing folks have a different spin than your engineering product teams versus your learning teams versus your services teams. So that's the talk that you have to be able to transcend all the different type of business areas to make sure they get what they need, and the requirements are very diverse sometimes and conflicting at times.
So how do you handle all these conflicting requirements without having all your resources getting consumed 100%? I mean, this sounds like a very large task.
Yeah, you kind of have to bring it, because it's so diverse, you have to bring the different players to the same table to have those kind of discussions to weigh out. Because in the end, it's the holistic benefit of the company. But I think unless you can expose what each other thinks about what they're trying to drive, then it's difficult. But it takes that bringing the minds together across the company. It's a bigger issue to do that because of the diverse need across the company.
Any advice for the audience how to bring these people to the table?
We tend to have committees of different business stakeholders, because we have your marketing folks and even brand protection, legal. We have all these things, and we have to bring them together and let them voice their needs. And then from there, we come to an understanding of where to go, and that weighs the priorities.
We also find that what we think we're going to be doing at the beginning of the year in the planning cycle frequently needs to change. And so one of the things we do is we're constantly re-examining our priorities throughout the year, so that if we need to make an adjustment because that's what the business really needs us to do, we're able to make that adjustment. And this year we've actually had to shift some major projects into next year because the business was demanding some things that had been previously lower in priority. And being open to hearing that from your customers is really important, because otherwise you blindly forge ahead and you don't deliver what they need. And for us, if we miss the mark, it tends to force the operating companies to go do something on their own. And that's when shadow IT creeps up. And then you really get surprises down the road of stuff that you're now forced to support because somebody in the business brought it in because you weren't meeting their needs. So keeping the lines of communication open is really crucial.
How many people here have that problem where your internal departments have gone and done something because they believe for one reason or another that you're not meeting their needs?
Everybody should raise their hand. I would just like to add on top of that we've got similar problems, and one of the approaches we're now taking in terms of both road mapping and being able to be agile and responsive is we're in the process of implementing a safe methodology, safe, lean, agile methodology, and our identity management pieces and architecture will fold into that. And so that gives us the opportunity to roadmap out everything, but yet have the stakeholders engaged and be able to respond quickly and appropriately when we need to, change priorities, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's on board with it, and we have, the process goes through, and it actually is working very, very well for us. And I'm turned into a little bit of an evangelist about it. It's the best process I've ever worked with in a long time in corporate America. So,
Kim?
Well, we have all those problems plus more.
yeah.
So what's your advice?
Well, first of all, we tend to, purchase other properties that have all their own identity systems, and so you have to be able to integrate those. And then we have the fact that because of the tremendous shift towards the cloud, basically our whole industry, our whole company has had to completely change itself. Mm-hmm. And so all of the, remember Craig Burton, some of the people will remember Craig Burton. When I first went to Microsoft 20 years ago, I said, well, gee, it's a big monolith and everything's controlled by Bill Gates, isn't it? And he said, no. He had been the head of identity of NDS at Novell, right?
Yes.
And so he actually knew as a competitor, and he said, "Oh no, it's actually 100 tornadoes, all spinning out of control." And I said, "Really?" And that's exactly what it was and what it is. And so all of these tornadoes are innovating. And things are changing. And so then the question is, how do you actually, and then the industry standards are changing, and we're the dog food eaters. We create these new, or adopt these new standards, and then our people have to apply them inside and experience all the early bugs and everything else. So basically, I guess the biggest problem is that it's one where you have to keep changing technology and innovating while keeping everything working. So if anything goes down in identity, if anything goes down in our section of the company, every single service and every single person at Microsoft suffers. And so you can imagine the noise that occurs. And this is with dog food software. So we have to be we have to really put a lot of resources into that. But then at the same time, we have to institute all this new technology that we need in order to survive 2 years from now or 3 years from now. So so the question is, how do you carve out enough budget to be able to have things that you need 2 years from now, while you're in emergency mode dealing with the things that are happening now? Do you guys have that problem too? I mean, where?
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And we do have those crises that come up. And I think most people in the audience are going to be familiar with this whole stress level that those of us in identity face, because when our stuff breaks, it takes down the whole company.
Yeah.
People can't authenticate, nobody's getting their work done. And so when something like that happens, it's all hands on deck, and it takes away from the longer term strategic work you were planning to do. So yeah, we have that same challenge, and we're trying to map out several years in advance what we want to do as the major strategic projects, so that we can get those in the business planning cycle and fund them. But our budget is only ever 1 year in advance. So it's really getting those priorities lined up so that we've got a pipeline of big stuff we want to do, or the big rocks, as my CISO likes to refer to them. And I know you guys eat your own dog food, but we prefer to think of drinking our own wine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll use that metaphor.
Yeah,
So planning is important. That's what you guys are saying.
Planning is critical.
But it's getting that balance in funding too.
Yeah.
Because, for example, we were really worried about insider attack, and so we were really worried we were being penetrated by foreign and non-foreign intelligence agencies and everybody else, because we have so many hundreds of thousands, millions actually, of corporate customers, right? Mm-hmm. And so then we had to completely transform our infrastructure so that no administrator could ever do anything, right? And this is huge, right? And doing this while everybody's using it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That takes us to an interesting question we were talking about earlier in the last panel also on zero trust. So the old is new again.
Yeah.
So how I'm sure that your executives are also asking you about, hey, but what about all this stuff about zero trust that I keep hearing? How are you guys educating your C-suite? And because these are just basic security hygiene practices.
Well, I'll go then. I mentioned earlier we have such a great advocate in our CISO, and she handles a lot of that. And she's built a really strong team around information security, in addition to the identity and access management practice where I work. And they're very good partners and have a really good set of tools. She's been able to address the C-suite and explain it in a way that they quickly understood. And for several years now, she's just been saying, look, assume this network is breached. There are nation states in our network, and we need to put the monitoring tools in place to detect breach, and we need to put the identity tools in place to control access. And it's really important that we prevent lateral spread. So that's an advantage that we've actually had, having this leader that we have, being able to explain that to the C-suite. And that's why we've gotten the funding to put those tools in place that help protect us, or at least mitigate the damage when something is exploited.
So is it fair to say that you guys have really adopted the move away from block to monitor and mitigate?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, we definitely moving into zero trust, all that driving that security, but we also fold in the experience, because as you knew, we as a very hybrid cloud going to O365, for example, it's the experience that resonates with the C-suite. They don't want to get on VPN to get onto O365. So how do you give them that, non-frictionless, productive experience that resonates with them better and get secure? They all, of course, support the security, but I think the experience is also important to them.
They want the convenience, and the technology supports it. And so what we've done to facilitate that work style is, in the case of Office 365, we're using conditional access, because of course we're always concerned about your email ending up on the wrong device, like grandma's PC at the holidays. And we want to make sure that we don't have that data leakage. So with conditional access, we've been able to restrict which devices you can use. So if it's a managed mobile device, that's fine. If it's not, you can't. If it's a domain joined PC, hybrid joined in Azure AD, even though it's joined our internal domain, that's okay. You can use the full native applications on your Windows or your Mac. That's fine. But if it's not a managed device, not domain joined, then we prevent them from getting to that data. And that's really helped us a lot in controlling the access, because we're very paranoid about the unmanaged devices. Not only getting our data, but also bringing something into our network.
Right.
What I would add to that is, again, on the enterprise side, what you guys have been discussing, we're definitely moving into the realm of zero trust, and our CISO's office has, several initiatives underway. On the customer-facing identity management side, that's a little trickier, and we're still behind on that. I mean, we're still, unfortunately, at username password level. There's some additional things that we'll probably be able to do here within the next year. But that is going for us, and I think for many, that's going to move slower or more slowly. And part of that is because in the enterprise world, you control your employees. You give them access, you can take away access. They're under your dominion in a much more controlled manner than customers are. Customers come, they go. You need to account for that life cycle and also let them have a good experience, while at the same time securing everything. And I think, personally, in my opinion, I think it's a much more difficult space because of that population, that transient population that goes back
What would your advice be? What are the maybe the top 2 or 3 things to look for when you're setting up your setting up a zero trust model, maybe for, and that's a big word, right? Means a lot of things.
Your customer portal, is that what you said?
Yes.
Well, the first thing is that, and this is speaking from very painful experience, where decisions went against the advice and counsel of the identity group, was make sure that the portal that you're building to serve your customers actually can actually federate with an external identity management system. And because as a company, I firmly believe, and I am sure everybody on this panel, and I bet everybody in this room agrees, as a company, you are the identity provider. You are your identity provider for your customers. When they interact with your company, you're the identity provider for your employee. You never want to do business with another company that says, well, no, I'm going to be the identity provider, and I've never heard of SAML. I mean, that's they haven't heard of SAML, and that's ancient, relatively ancient. So that gives you an idea of like the very first thing that you should be thinking about in that regard. And then going forward, I think you want to make sure that when you architect your solution that you at the same time you're taking into account security, and that you're also taking into account the kinds of information that you in your identity architecture that you want to keep versus what's going to be mastered from elsewhere. And that sounds really detailed, but that actually is a really big deal in how you federate with multiple applications when you're still providing your customer their single identity.
So that actually takes us to, we heard a lot about privacy this week. Alex talked about it this morning also. And privacy is important not only for the consumer side of the equation, but also for employees, because all your employees are also consumers within your own organization and outside. So how does the current focus, there is a renewed focus, or at least at least a more observation about privacy. How does that changing your current approach around access control and IAM, both for internal users, your partners, and your consumers? And Kim, I'd like you to take this.
Well, I so agree with you that the problem of consumer identity, where you don't control anything basically, and you have to really respect the person, is a lot harder than the traditional enterprise approach of you work for me, therefore you will do what I say. And yet we know ultimately whatever happens in the consumer world eventually takes over the enterprise too, right? Mm-hmm. As you see in the CEO suite.
Yes.
And so what we did a few years ago is we said, well, gee, all the technology that we have that is used for employees, the sort of the inside wiring is okay, of sending claims around, but the experiential side, I think the word is sucks.
That's the technical term.
That's the technical term. Thank you. So, what we said what we need is a way that we can have flexible user journeys that are context specific. So when somebody's going to do something where you don't need a lot of security, they don't go through a lot of friction. Where somebody is doing something where clearly they're doing something where it's very sensitive. It's a pay-as-you-go system. You'll get more friction because you're doing something where it's worth having that friction because you're doing something very sensitive. So we developed a whole new technology called the Identity Experience Framework that replaces sort of a fixed login mechanism.
Is that
and I believe that's
inside thing only, or is that?
No, that's now a product. It's gone into. It's now been released, if you can believe it. It took a number of years, but it's now in production. But I do. Whether you look at what we've done there, or whether you look at what other people have done there, this whole notion of having journeys that are completely what you can change, you can skin it, but you can also change the experiences. Say, well, here you have to, or maybe go out to other systems and pull in attributes so that you can do more just-in-time vetting of people. That's the new thing, because I think the enterprise is now an enterprise of everyone, all the stakeholders, not just the employees. And really, that's going to replace the employee systems, the traditional employee systems that we've had. So that's what we've been working on, and so it's, once you have that kind of thing, you can now say, well, let's say that FIDO comes along or DID comes along. If you have a system like that, then once that system implements FIDO, or once that system, as part of its user journey palette, if you know what I mean, you can now, you don't have to change anything on the inside of your corporation. It's just that journey changes. So to me, that's the most important change that the industry has made, is having these journey contextually specific identity approach, instead of a one-size-fits-all, okay, you're going to log in now and you're going to do this, and now you have to move over to MFA, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, for us, we do a lot of dog food, champagne drinking also, and it's still a journey for us, but some of the things...
That's quite a visual, by the way.
Yeah.
But, and if you do this, these things all use the standardized protocols, so it's very easy to sip some other wine, because you don't have to change anything on the back end, right? In order to try it out.
Yeah, definitely.
So an abstraction layer is important?
Yeah, because it's too complicated. First of all, who has the machine learning mechanisms to really protect you can't protect yourself. It's just impossible now. Yeah. It's only if you have the view of, a very, very wide view, you can start to figure out who the enemy is. Because you see them popping up here and there and everywhere, and then you start to say, those are we can now detect the enemy. Whereas if you're just one enterprise trying to protect yourself, you don't have the visibility. So I think that these systems that do this kind of thing that I'm talking about are really helpful. And a company doesn't have to take a dependency on, say, a Microsoft or anyone else, because you're basically using standardized protocols. And so if Microsoft or somebody, annoys you, you can just say, okay, I'm going to switch over to this other one. You see what I'm saying? And so you don't have to go through that. Am I going to be taken hostage by a big corporation?
Yeah, assuming you can find another provider that provides those signals.
Yeah.
And the other challenge that I see is our CEO has been pushing cloud first for several years now, and we've really adopted a lot of SaaS services for all manner of the systems our employees need to use. And as you were saying, that user journey where it's something more sensitive, you want to step it up. A lot of the SaaS services that we use don't have any of those hooks to step up. It's not part of the system. So for example, I'm in an HR system and I want to view my information. Well, ID and password might be enough. But if I want to start viewing my direct reports information and see their salaries and performance reviews, wherever I happen to be, that's a case where I should be asked to step up. Because
it has to be easy for those applications to adopt this, to call for something higher, right? But right now it's not. And there's a lot of retrofitting.
Right. We are starting to go down the journey of putting more context in the network, context in attributes. We've done attributes things over the evolution too, but it is a retrofit, and it's there's no real standards yet. I think it's evolving to make it easy for application developers to adapt, to be very adaptive and provide access in an adaptive way.
So how do you provide guidance to your application developers around protecting privacy of the information, or do you do that at as a central architectural mandate, or is it on a education on a per application team?
We drive it more, it's an education. I think for us, we have a very open data culture, and it's been evolving since GDPR to relook at data a different way, and to do privacy by design, to actually look at how to shift left, make the security, the privacy, all those things up front, and even consent. Even internal systems, whether I can use my phone number to reset my password, how should that be exposed? Because it's my personal mobile number.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have privacy as one of the sections in our software development lifecycle. And within information security, we have an entire group that looks at all of our digital properties. And they all have to be reviewed by this group, and the data classification has to be reviewed. So there's a whole approval process before any new website can go into production, whether it's internal or external. That group looks at everything, and we work very closely with them because we do all the single sign-on implementations for these applications.
Stephanie,
we have the same plus 3,000 lawyers.
Stephanie, what about you? You deal a lot with the consumers and probably PCI-related data also.
Right, and so one of the things that we've started to do, and this comes from having, for those who are if there's anybody out here in the telecom world.
Telecom?
Are there any telecom people here? Oh, not a one.
They don't have architecture. So
oh, yes, we do. So we do, but we migrated to a new billing system last year, and in the telecom world, a billing system is much more than something that prints your invoice. In the telecom world, the billing system is also what manages your products and services and what helps provision those products and services. So it's a really big deal when you do this. And as a part of it, we had to re-architect our customer identity management system to reflect this new reality. And we did something that I'm sure everybody else in the room is already, a million years ahead of us, but we were getting off of an old system and going to a new system. So we finally had an opportunity to do this. And it was put in an enterprise integration layer so that we could actually start using access tokens, having APIs talking to each other, and securing access to all of our assets to only those that would go through our access manager, receive the correct tokens, et cetera. And we're moving forward with this and locking everything down so that the only way you can have access is to go through this enterprise integration layer so that we know what you're doing, who you are, and what data you're accessing. And that's been very solid on our customer side, and our enterprise side is also using the same thing. The one other thing I would add to the conversation about the enterprise and dealing with software as a service providers in the cloud is the capabilities of those providers vary wildly. You can have some that are just right up to date on the latest standards, and they are awesome. And then you have other providers that someone else in your company has selected, and they don't have the first clue about how to integrate, even at the enterprise level.
So this is a good question because I'm sure a lot of people here have the same problem. How do you deal when that has already happened? That ship has sailed, they've already chosen a vendor. How do you incorporate them or work with that?
Well, I mean, I think you whine, jump up and down and protest a little bit, and then you cope with the hand that you've been dealt, and you work with the company, and, first of all, you ask all the questions about roadmap, what's your time frame, and of course, it's never when you need it. And so then you basically work around and do what you can do to create this secure integration with this company. And we've done more than one custom to make sure that integration, to make sure that we.
So communication,
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah, and again, this, our new SAFE methodology should hopefully take care of some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the liability that is coming
Right.
is going to tamp this down.
That will change everything.
Yeah.
That will change everything.
Yeah, before there was no stick,
Yeah, no one
only
who
a
cared.
carrot. Yeah.
Cared.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
How many people here have customers in California?
No, even we do.
Okay, so obviously you guys are interested in what to do with CCPA. So, any advice on, Cisco being in California, so I think we'll start with you. What are you guys doing for complying with the CCPA, and what your advice would be how to go about looking at CCPA for our audience?
Besides having a lot of lawyers involved.
Yes, besides getting the lawyers involved.
I think the evolution through what we had, because we're a global company, through GDPR and CCPA is just more of an evolution down that path of just really understanding what all the changes we need to do. And in some ways, the benefit is that there is a stick now, and I think it helps drive some of the appropriate right things in treating data and privacy. But it is an evolution of making all that happen and changing all of the systems and the education across the system. The change management is probably the hardest part of all of it, but that's the getting all that.
So folks who haven't yet started down their journey, what steps should they be taking?
I think you first, those that haven't started, I think you have to start understanding what your data is and understanding how to classify what it is and where it's going, and then going down, how to treat it, and a lot of education, honestly.
Yeah, at Microsoft, we had to do this for the GDPR.
Yeah.
You probably did too.
Yeah, we did.
And you know what? We didn't know where any of our data was really. I mean, people thought they did. But then when it actually got to the point where, we really had to be methodical about it, and it was actually a great experience for us. And we learned, we had to redesign our systems, and we had to get it under control. And it was a great experience. I mean, and it's just a question of, do you have the funding to do that? But you must do it now.
Yeah.
You must do it because of GDPR, and then are you going to then have to do it and have a different system for the US? No, it's too expensive.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Don't you think?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's pushing a lot of people. And then this DID stuff. One of the advantages of DID is you can actually store information with the user rather than with you're taking. You can really eliminate a lot of the liability, because if the user has the data and provides it to you when you need it, when they connect, then you need this personalization. You don't need that personalization a lot of the time in the back end, right? And so why should we be taking the liability when we don't need it? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of customers who are coming to us and saying, well, we don't want that. We don't. The CXO suite, in terms of the customers we're dealing with, a lot of them are coming to us, and I guess it's because, I'm in favor of this, but anyway, that they come to us. But they're saying, how can we reduce our liability? And why shouldn't we? Well, I mean, people have a lot more liability than they need in order to get their business, and they can also get a much better relationship with what they really need is a nice, strong relationship with the customer. So you can get that by being more respectful of the customer and allowing the customer to have a better input into what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So I have a question about that, and that's thinking about the vision that you were, just articulating. So, like using an iPhone, for example. Mm-hmm. Well, Apple controls that, Apple ID, and we've heard about how close their iOS is. Who would be your digital? So as an end user, who's gonna own my digital identity on my device? How am I gonna manage that?
Well, this is the really interesting thing with this DIF stuff, the DID. You use the blockchain
Right.
and no company owns it. And, for example, at Microsoft, we have, I don't know, something like 2 billion identities that we're responsible for protecting. And we know that...
That's a lot of liability.
I'm sitting there going, whoa.
This is liability of, I won't say it. And so, and the attackers, you saw the statistic this morning, that was great, about the trillions doubling, and the current system is not sustainable. It's like it's like climate change, only worse. If you'll pardon me. Anyway, it really is not sustainable, and we have to have a different way of protecting people. And so what we need is this strong identities that are not owned by Microsoft or not owned by Google or Apple. I mean, this latest Apple thing is just more of the same, if you ask me, where they're still owning your identities. We've got to get rid of that. And so where does it live? It lives in the blockchain. Now you can say, well, it can live in multiple blockchains, but not exposing any PII. Just the organizational structure that lets you organize your devices and synchronize them and everything, but it isn't owned by anybody. So anyway, I know it sounds like science fiction, but it's not. It's actually for real. And so I do think people should, have hope,
Right.
and look at this a bit. It's as they were saying this morning on the standards panel. It's probably 5-10 years before we fully get there. But that can replace, there are ways to do it so that you put information with the user, but don't take any dependency on anybody else. So you'll be hearing more about this. In other words, you can't have a system where, in order for you to do your business properly, to be successful in your business, you have to take dependencies on others adopting new technology. That won't work.
Yeah. So right. We're nearly there. So in closing, what I'd like each of you to share maybe with the audience is one piece of advice that you would give, that you would give to yourself if you could give that advice to yourself, and the other is. What should new technology being developed like DIDs and devices are getting smarter, AI is getting smarter, machine learning is getting cheaper. What is the one or two pieces of technology that people should be aware of or keep an eye out on or start looking out for that is going to change the landscape in the next 2 to 3 years?
I think for me, I think that the advice is around privacy, because I think that's driving with the new regulations coming out for being a California company. And we've already started with GDPR, but for the masses that haven't started down that journey and had to, is to get a hold of your data, figure out where it is, do all the steps to get ready.
Okay.
And then for technology, I think AI and many of those things, but AI and ethical AI, how do you handle that and do it properly with privacy is what you have to factor.
Okay, that's a good point. Greg?
All right, well, I don't want to repeat what Kristina said, correct as she is, but I'll say that we all have to deploy complicated technologies, whether it's an upgrade of something you currently run or you're outright replacing it. My best advice there is plan for how you're deploying it or introducing it before you start building it. It'll save you a lot of time and heartache later if you plan for how to get it out to the masses, especially if you're migrating from something old to something new. You've got to have some kind of coexistence plan. And as far as technology to keep an eye on, I'll echo the AI and machine learning. We're actually looking at how we can apply that to get multi-factor in front of everything without inflicting undue friction on a couple 100,000 people who know where we work.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think I'd be an enterprise architect. I don't think I could keep my chops on that if I didn't say that. I think one of the really most important things that you can do is carefully architect your solution around standards, be modular so that you can try new things, see if they work or not. And if they work, great. If they don't, you can pull it out, drop something else in. I think doing the architecture and looking towards the future and the roadmap is extremely important. In terms of technology, I think FIDO2 is something that we'll be using very soon.
Okay. Kim?
Well, as I said, I think in the immediate, it's this idea of contextually specific journeys, and using the cloud and its machine learning in order to take advantage of. You don't have to write all of that. You can just adopt that as long as you have a choice. In other words, you have the ability to switch, because it's all based on standards, to switch to somebody else, right? So I think that whole idea of, we call it Identity Experience Framework, and it's behind this thing called B2C. You can look at that, and there are others who are doing a good job competing with us. And so I would urge people to look at that. And then, of course, I agree in terms of FIDO2, and ultimately, I would keep my eyes open about this decentralized identity thing, because I think through the use of these services, it will actually come in a lot faster than people think. But I'm an optimist. Some days.
Thank you. And any questions from the audience?
We weren't very interactive.
I know.
They weren't very interactive. Well, I mean, they did raise their hand for a few minutes. Go ahead, sir. There's a mic.
So on the telecom side, I know that some of the financials are looking to the mobile network operators to provide identity information, and it concerned me a little bit that you said that it was kind of a second-class citizen in your environment.
Looking to the.
Comment on that?
Could you say? I didn't hear you. Looking to the. I thought you said low helicopters. That can't be right. What did you say?
Well, let's try that again. There's companies that are offering connections to telecoms, mobile
Right.
network operators, using that telecom record as a identifier for a person who wants to become registered on like a website.
Right, like using like a mobile phone, your mobile phone number, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So your comment seemed a little scary, that it was maybe a second-class citizen in terms of data protection.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Customer and consumer data are, they are, and I'm sorry if I gave that impression, are really strongly protected. Not only do we do it because it's the right thing to do and it's ethically a big part of our company's principles, but also the FCC will rake you over the coals if you release any PII. All you have to do is think of, it's so long now, but the Hewlett-Packard example of when public or private investigators got telecom records. So no, we protect them we take that very, very seriously. Now, if a third party, if you sign up, let's say when you're signing up, and you Google and they say, provide your cell phone number so that you can we can send you an SMS. We're not a part of that transaction at all, and I'm sure you guys know that. But for our piece, for the wireless phones that we provide, we will be using that as a part of like a second factor authentication tool. But no, and I'm very sorry, oh gosh, we take that about as seriously as you can get. Oh, I know. We're one step below healthcare. I remember. Healthcare and financial services companies those screws are down very, very, very tight in terms of regulation. Yeah. The telecoms are just like, we're next in line after that. So. In terms of scrutiny, yes.
With that, I do want to thank our panel. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.